The 1930s was an era of strange circus attractions and shocking human spectacles. Across America and Europe, crowds gathered to witness people whose bodies seemed almost impossible to believe. Some weighed over half a ton, while others possessed unbelievable strength and size. But behind the carnival lights were real human stories, filled with struggle, fame, loneliness, and survival. These were the forgotten giants of history, people who turned curiosity into legend during one of the darkest decades on Earth. While Rosalie Bradford reached her peak fame in the late 20th century, her story is the culmination of everything these 1930s figures endured. Born in 1943, she inherited the legacy of the world's heaviest, the record and the recovery. Rosalie reached a peak weight of 1,200 pounds, 544 kilograms. She was the modern Robert Earl Hughes, but with one major difference: she had access to modern psychology and medicine. After a failed suicide attempt, she began a journey of recovery. A new chapter. Rosalie lost over 900 pounds, a world record. Her life turned from a tragedy of size into a triumph of the spirit. She became a motivational speaker, using the same spectacle of her body to educate people about the dangers of food addiction and the possibility of change. She bridged the gap between the 1930s freak show and the modern era of health and wellness. Joe Vercillo was an American heavyweight who specialized in the museum circuit. In the 1930s, major cities had dime museums where people could see curiosities for 10 cents. The art of stillness. Joe's act was simple. He sat. He would weigh himself on a giant scale several times a day to prove his weight over 500 pounds to skeptical crowds. He was a man of few words, often described as a gentle, silent mountain. His contribution to the era was the sheer physical proof of what the human body could endure. Babe was the stage name of a performer who toured with the major railroads in the 1930s. She was unique because she combined her weight with a high-level musical talent. Breaking the stereotype. While most fat ladies were expected to just sit and be looked at, Babe played the accordion and sang. She was a double act, a musical talent, and a physical marvel. This gave her a level of autonomy and respect that many of her peers lacked. She was a reminder that these individuals were, first and foremost, human beings with passions and skills. Though Daniel Lambert 1,771,809 lived long before the 1930s, his name was the gold standard for size during that decade. In 1930s England, if a man was large, he was called a Lambert. He was the historical benchmark against which all others were measured, a man of dignity. Lambert was not a circus performer by choice. He was an athletic man in his youth, a swimmer, an otter hunter, and a breeder of dogs. He served as the keeper of the Bridewell, a prison in Leicester. When the prison closed, Lambert found himself without an income and with a body that had ballooned to over 700 pounds. The London Exhibition. In April 1806, he moved to London and began charging visitors to see him. Unlike the carnival acts of the 30 sex, Lambert's exhibition was a gentleman's salon. He sat in a refined room, and visitors were expected to engage in intellectual conversation with him. He was famously sensitive about his weight being seen as a result of gluttony. He drank only water and ate moderate portions. In the 1930s, his story was often used by journalists to argue that corpulence could be a medical mystery rather than a moral failing. During the 1930s, Baby Ruth Elkins became a household name in the American South and Midwest. She was the quintessential fat lady of the carnival circuit, a role that carried a surprising amount of prestige in the hierarchy of the big top. The aesthetics of abundance. Baby Ruth weighed roughly 550 pounds. In an era where many American families were surviving on government rations and Hoover stew, Ruth's appearance was a shocking contrast. She was marketed as the largest woman in the world, often wearing frilly doll-like dresses to emphasize the irony of her name. Survival through stardom. For women like Ruth, the circus was a refuge. In normal society, she would have been an outcast, unable to find work or navigate a standard home. In the carnival, she was a star. She earned a significant salary, often more than the men who came to gawk at her. She used her stage presence to command respect, often flirting with the audience or telling bawdy jokes, turning the power dynamic in her favor. If the other figures on this list represented bulk, Kate Brumback represented power. Known as the Great Sandwina, she was a 6-foot-tall, 200+ pound powerhouse of muscle and grace. A dynasty of strength. Kate was born into a circus family in Germany. Her parents were both performers, and she was trained from birth to be an athlete. In the 1930s, she moved to America to join Ringling Bros. and Barnum and Bailey. Her most famous stunt involved her husband, Max Heyman. Max, a man of average size, would sit in her palm as she lifted him toward the circus tent's ceiling. The icon of female strength. Sandwina was a pioneer. At a time when women were expected to be dainty and fragile, she was a human fortress. She famously defeated the great strongman Eugene Sandow in a weightlifting contest from whom she took her stage name. Throughout the 32nd, she was a symbol of health and vigor, proving that being large could also mean being the pinnacle of human physical capability. Percy Wells was the UK's premier heavyweight attraction in the mid-1930s. He was a staple of the Blackpool Illuminations and London exhibition halls. The illusion of scale. Wells' promoters were masters of hyperbole. His posters often depicted him as being as tall as a house, with people standing under his arms. In reality, Wells was a massive man whose size made it nearly impossible for him to walk. He was a seated attraction. The industrial giant. Wells represented the old-world style of exhibition. He would sit on a stage draped in velvet, and for a few pennies, the British public could see a man who seemed to defy the very laws of gravity. His life was one of extreme isolation, as his size confined him to the back of transport trucks and the specialized stages of the fairground. Arthur Caley was a giant in every sense of the word, tall, broad, and incredibly heavy. Born on the Isle of Man, he moved to the US and later returned to England, often billed as the largest man on Earth. The performance of size. Caley stood over 7'11" and weighed nearly 600 pounds. In the 1930s, his legend was often revived in pulp magazines. He wasn't just fat, he was a titan. His presence was so intimidating that stories circulated of him scaring away entire groups of rowdy spectators just by standing up. The mystery of Suleiman El-Hamid. To add a layer of exoticism, he was often presented under the name Suleiman El-Hamid. This reflected the 1930s obsession with the mysterious East. He would wear robes and a turban, adding a layer of theatricality to his massive physical presence. Minnie Woolsey is one of the most heartbreaking figures of the 1930s sideshow. While not heavy like the others, her size was a matter of strange proportions. She suffered from Vercillo syndrome, a form of primordial dwarfism. The 1,932 film freaks. Minnie became globally famous after appearing in Todd Browning's 1932 cult classic film, Freaks. In the film, she is Cuckoo the Bird Girl. She had almost no hair, was blind, and had a skeletal structure that made her look like a creature from another planet. A life of captivity. Minnie spent decades in a living skeleton act. Her large status came from her enlarged glasses and the way she was presented as a massive biological anomaly. Her story serves as a darker reminder of how the 1930s exploited those who did not fit the human mold. Robert Earl Hughes remains perhaps the most poignant figure in the history of human weight. Born in 1926, his childhood in the late 1920s and early 32nd was a race against his own biology. Unlike many on this list whose weight was the result of lifestyle or metabolic slowdown in adulthood, Robert's body was driven by a malfunctioning pituitary gland from infancy. The biological engine. By the age of 6, Robert weighed 200 pounds. To put this in perspective, he was a first grader with the mass of a grown man. By the time he reached the 1930s golden era of sideshows, he was a teenager who had already bypassed the 500-pound mark. His life was a series of engineering challenges. His father, a farmer, had to reinforce the floorboards of their home and build custom chairs that could withstand the pressure of a quarter ton. The 1930s spectacle. As the Great Depression gripped America, the Hughes family found that Robert's condition was a potential source of income. Traveling in a custom-built truck, which essentially served as his mobile home, Robert visited fairs across the Midwest. He was never a performer in the sense of doing tricks. He was a living monument. People paid 10 cents to walk past him. What set Robert apart was his temperament. He was famously the gentle giant, possessing a high-pitched, friendly voice and a genuine interest in the people who came to stare at him. He would often chat with children, easing their fear of his massive frame. The tragic end of a legend. Robert's peak weight was eventually recorded at 1,069 pounds, 485 kilograms. His waist was measured at 122 inches. However, the world that marveled at him was also the world that failed him. In 1958, while traveling with a carnival, he contracted a minor case of measles. In a person of average size, it would have been manageable. In Robert, the infection led to uremia, kidney failure. Because no hospital could accommodate his size, he was treated in his trailer, where he eventually passed away. His casket was a custom-built piano box, lowered into the earth by a crane, a final, heavy metaphor for a man who spent his life being too large for the world around him.